It's the food that's really going to help support your health and promote health and longevity, not the one that's going to take away from that.
It turns on all kinds of good processes in our body that keep us from aging and keep us from getting sick.
It's the elephant in the room.
Exactly.
About health.
It was the last thing that I ever questioned.
We do see this increasing burden of obesity-related diseases that's now killing over 11 million people a year. And so we're kind of stuck, but you really tackle this issue in a new way in your book, Feel Great, Lose Weight. So why don't you share with us sort of what inspired you to sort of write one more weight loss book, because why do we need one? And two, what are some of the key ways that you have reframed things according to what you call the 4 W's and maybe the 1 H to rethink of the problem of how we lose weight and sustain the weight loss?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Mark. And as you've so well pointed out, this is a massive problem, not just in the US, not just in the UK, but in many, many countries around the world. And we're all struggling to find, what is the best way? Is there a way that's going to work for everybody? And many different people are trying. And we're all trying to contribute in the best way that we can to help tackle this problem. But the reason I wrote this book, Mark, is because I felt that in the common narrative, what I felt was missing was a compassionate approach to this issue. A lot of the approaches are based on deprivation, restriction, punishing regimes. And, I think those things can work in the short term for sure. You can do any diet or regime for 2 or 3 weeks and you'll probably feel better. But as you know, Mark, most patients, yes, that can be helpful, but most patients aren't looking for short-term change. They're looking for real transformation in their lives. They want more energy. They want to feel great, right? They don't want to lose weight and feel that their life is not going the way they want to. And I've seen this with many patients, Mark, that they had to really punish themselves to lose weight. And yes, they lost weight, but they weren't liking themselves. They didn't enjoy who they were. And what I tried to do, as you say, there's so many books on this topic already. What can I contribute that might be fresh? Because I'm not interested in writing a book that's already been written. I'm interested in trying to contribute maybe a fresh perspective that may help some people who've not been helped with other approaches. And it's a very rounded approach. So I split the book up into, yes, what we eat, which of course, what we eat is, as you know, and you've written many fantastic books on this topic about what we should be eating to fuel our bodies. But often what doesn't get written about also is why we eat. What's driving us to eat certain things, even when we know they're probably not helping us. And so that could be stress, loneliness, boredom, all kinds of emotional issues, which I don't feel are tackled enough. So it's what we eat, why we eat, when we eat, how we eat, and also where we eat. And I felt that was quite a fresh way of looking at this, looking at these 5 separate areas. But the underlying belief, Mark, behind this book is, I've been seeing patients for 20 years now. I know you've been seeing patients for a lot longer than I have. But in those 20 years, I found that you can almost always help somebody lose weight in a sustainable way, in one that works them in the long term, once you find the right approach for them. And I think that's what my book does. It helps people find what is the right approach for me.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's funny. I love the way you titled it, which is Feel Great, Lose Weight, not lose weight, feel great. And I think that's that's a very important distinction, because, my framework is not actually telling people to lose weight, is to get them healthy. And as you create health, the side effect is weight loss. Yeah, and I just...
Spot on. I mean, you've just nailed it right there. And actually, there was a bit of, if I'm honest, there was a bit of conflict with the publisher over this, because...
I bet there was. They were like, lose weight, feel great.
Yeah. And I was like, no, listen. This is the point of the book, is it's feel great first. Weight loss comes as a side effect of feeling great. And yeah, I also, I was very reticent to write a book around weight loss, Mark, if I'm honest, because, I feel like you, it's a very holistic approach. It's like, take care of the basics. The weight loss comes as a side effect of taking care of those basics. But actually what I've noticed here in the UK, and I'm pretty sure it's the same in America, is that So many people have been conditioned to only pick up a book if it promises them weight loss. So I can talk about all I want. I want to promote health. I want to promote well-being. And the weight loss comes as a side effect. But there is a population of people who every January are picking up the latest diet book, the latest workout regime. And I thought, you know what? I want this holistic, this rounded approach to reach those people. And the only way I can reach them is by saying weight loss on the cover. So the approach is not dissimilar to the approach that you stand for, the approach that I stand for. But actually, as we've seen in the UK in the last 6-7 weeks since it's been out, it really is hitting an audience who've not heard this stuff before, as well as my existing audience. People going, oh, I didn't know that. I thought I had to punish myself and restrict myself. So that's why I wrote this. It's to really show people that you can feel great and lose weight. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
Well, I think that's what you talk about in the book that's so important that people don't understand is that as you regulate your body's biological systems, as you eat in a way and live in a way and address all those 5 aspects, what, why, where, when, and how of food, we automatically will regulate the brain chemistry and the hormones that are causing us to overeat or to crave the wrong things or to want things at the wrong time of day, or we're setting our biology straight in a way that makes it not about hunger or deprivation or lack or starvation or even calorie restriction. And I think most people don't understand that weight loss is really not about calorie restriction or any of those other things. It's about, in some ways, it's more about those other 4 things than what you eat. I mean, yes, you have to focus on what, but you also have to focus on all these other aspects that you address that most people aren't really looking at. And it's funny, I just finished, my book also came out, The Vegan Diet. And afterwards, someone pointed out, Dr. Hyman, you wrote a whole book on food. There's nothing in there about weight loss. And I was like, you're right. And I think that was semi-intentional, an accident, but it was eat great for your mood, or eat for longevity, or eat as a vegetarian, or how to personalize nutrition, or what different. There's all sorts of different things in there, but they're all about helping the body get reset to its natural factory settings. And when you create health, disease goes away, which you wrote your book, How to Make Disease Disappear, and also the weight just comes off automatically. And I think when you focus on weight loss, it's also often a punitive thing. And I think that's the thing I love about your book, Feel Great, Lose Weight. It's not blaming the victim. It's not saying, oh, you're just a glutton. You're not able to control yourself. You don't have enough willpower. That's why you can't lose weight. And that is an incredible stigma that's put on people who have weight issues. And if you look at the data on children, for example, if you're in a wheelchair and you're a quadriplegic kid, you're less likely to be stigmatized than if you're an overweight kid. That's pretty shocking. And so tell us more about how we can kind of think about these other aspects. For example, we're thinking about one of these other aspects about why we're eating or where you're eating. Dive down into some of these sort of more subtle aspects of your book.
Yeah, so Why We Eat is the second section of these 5 sections in the book. And I've got to say it's my favorite one. It's the one that I really put my heart and soul into the whole book, but that one in particular, I don't think is getting enough airtime. And I nearly started the book with it, actually, but I chose not to. I went with What We Eat in the end because I kind of thought we're so conditioned to only thinking about that aspect when it comes to our health and weight loss that I thought, let me meet people where they're at and then move them over into these other areas. But why we eat? So, look, the best way I can describe it is we used to only eat to fill a hole in our stomachs. Now we eat to fill a hole in our hearts, right? When we're lonely, we eat. When we're bored, we eat. When we're stressed, we eat. When we feel disconnected, we eat. And that's okay, but you've got to understand that, right? A lot of the time, this is going on in the background. We don't take time to understand that, and we keep looking for the latest diet book to give us the solution. Look, the times in which we're living, Mark, I guess are the perfect way to describe this. So in the pandemic, with these lockdowns, with these restrictions, many people have put on weight. I don't know about the American media, but the UK media have these terms like the Corona Stone, the Quarantine 15, right? So the people recognize that they're
COVID-19.
Yeah, I didn't know that one, but yeah. And so a lot of people, and especially when they're seeing the evidence for what that does to their risk of complications, they're getting quite stressed and they're looking for a new diet book to help them get on top of things. But what if that's the wrong place to look for some people? So the research suggests that about 80% of us change our eating behavior in response to stress. 45% of us or so will eat more. 35% or so will eat less. So that's almost half the population are eating more in response to stress, right? So if that's you or me, if we're eating more in response to stress and we're putting on weight, do we need a new diet book, or do we need better strategies managing stress? It's the same with sleep, for example. Like sleep, a lot of people are sleep deprived at the moment. A lot of people are worried, they're anxious. We know from the data that if you sleep, let's say 5.5 hours a night compared to 8 hours, you're gonna eat on average 22% more calories the following day. So 5 days of not sleeping well, you may eat a whole extra day's worth of calories just from not sleeping well. I'm sure your audience may be familiar with this, but what happens when you don't sleep well? Well, ghrelin, your hunger hormone, goes up, so you're always feeling hungry. Your satiety hormones go down, so you never feel full. You're more emotionally reactive in your brain. You find it harder to say no to temptation. So some of my patients, Mark, I can remember this 44-year-old lady who every January would go on a brand new diet. She'd have a bit of success. Then by March, she was back to where she was before. She was even heavier. That wasn't the worst thing. The worst thing was actually that her self-esteem had gone. And that's the funny thing about the diet industry, Mark. It's the only industry where we don't blame the diet we're following. We blame ourselves. We feel like we're worthless, which speaks to what you said before, which is why I think the first paragraph in the book says, it's not your fault, right? So really trying to understand that, hey, you know what? This is not your fault. So that 44-year-old lady...
And by the way, the message that we all hear, which is losing weight is about eating less and exercising more, is implicit in that statement is that it's your fault. If you can't control your hunger and you can't get up your lazy butt off the couch, it's your fault. And that is the biggest propaganda that's been put on our population that undermines people's self-worth, like you're saying, and undermines their ability to actually understand how their body works and lose weight in a way that is integrity with their natural biological systems, which they're not doing. And so I keep going. I think this is really an important point around the blame, not blaming the victim.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just to finish off on sleep. So that lady, that 44-year-old lady, I helped her lose significant amounts of weight sustainably without her even trying. And I didn't actually have to focus on her diet. I just got her sleeping 8 hours a night. And actually, once she was sleeping 8 hours a night, it was like a ripple effect. She made better choices in every other aspect of her life. And again, the point of this book is to help people find the right approach for them. For someone else, it might be changing what they eat. For someone, it might be why we eat. But if we personalize that approach, we're much more likely to be successful rather than trying to follow a one-size-fits-all. But what you said about blame, Mark, there's another section in the book which I think really speaks to this, and that's, I know the ACEs study with Dr. Vincent Folletti and how he's shown...
What does ACEs mean?
Adverse childhood experiences. So if we have been, if we have gone through, there's a trauma, list of what these
child abuse, beating, emotional abuse, abandonment,
exactly,
all those
physical,
things, right?
mental, emotional, then we're significantly more likely to be overweight and obese later on in life, which kind of makes sense if you really think about it. But again, this is missing from the conversation around weight loss. And I detail a case study in the book. I remember really well this lady I saw. I think I saw her when she was about 19 or 20. And she was really struggling to lose weight. She was carrying a lot of excess body fat. And she said, Dr. Chatterjee, what's interesting is I never used to. Like this only happened in the last few years. I'm not entirely sure what's happening. And we tried various things. We weren't getting anywhere. And as I got to know her better, Mark, I started to pick up that there was something else going on here. We started to unpick that when she was 16, she was in an abusive relationship, right, with a man. And I could tell that there was real unexplored, unresolved emotion with that. I sent her for some therapy. And in those therapy sessions, it turned out that she was being abused when she was 16. And then her strategy to not be in that position ever again was to put on weight. And what I mean by that is this. She never wanted to be in an abusive relationship again. So her subconscious mind basically thought, hey, listen, if I put on weight, I'm no longer going to be unattractive. I'm no longer going to be attracted to men. Therefore, I will never be in an abusive relationship again. And it was only when we managed to unpick that in therapy over a course of months and even into years, once she had processed that emotional trauma, right, the weight started to come off. But there was no point beating her up saying, you're being lazy, you're not following the diet, you're not moving enough. That wasn't the right approach for her. And Mark, I tell you one of the most gratifying things, because I nearly didn't write this book because I thought, why go into a divisive area like weight loss? You start writing about weight loss and you start getting attacked because you like, we can talk about body positivity shortly. I'm largely in agreement with people saying we shouldn't. I'm definitely in agreement saying that we shouldn't shame people who are carrying excess body fat, which is different from not being able to talk about what are the consequences of that from a health perspective. It's two separate arguments, but. Since the book came out, Mark, I've had so many messages, particularly on Instagram, from people saying, Dr. Chatterjee, I just want to thank you for writing that section. And one lady in particular said, I can now see why the last 20 years I've not managed to stick to anything. I was also abused when I was 16, and reading that section has made me phone up a therapist. I've now got a session booked, and I'm now going to get back on top of my life. And that's why we write these books, Mark. It's because just for that one person who read that and now is going to take action and realize that she's not a failure, for me, that's worth it.
Amazing. Yeah, I think, it's important to sort of this why is so important. It's underappreciated. And I often joke, and I see often we don't ask the right questions. We ask, what are you eating? Not what's eating you. And I often would ask my patients when they want to open the fridge or the pantry to get something, I say, ask yourself two questions. What am I feeling and what do I need?
I had this really nice exercise in the book that I think your audience will probably really like. It's called the 3 Fs, or the freedom exercise. And, let's say someone's listening to this, Mark, and they're sitting on their sofa in the evening. It's 8:30 at night. They've got the television on and they feel like having some ice cream, right? Let's say, because that's pretty common for people to feel like that in the evening. Okay, so the first F is feel. Just take a pause for a minute. You can write it down if you want, or just think, what am I really feeling? Am I hungry for food, or am I hungry for something else? Right, so it could be, actually, I'm really stressed today. I've been on Zoom calls all day and I've not managed to go out yet. Or it could be, I've had a row with my partner, or the children's bedtime took too long. Or, as many people are facing now, Mark, I'm lonely. You know what? I've not seen anyone. And actually, that food is providing a bit of nourishment for me. So first F is feel. What are you feeling? The second F is feed. How does food feed that feeling? Okay, I'm feeling stressed. When I eat ice cream for 20 minutes or so, I feel less stressed. Okay, now you're building in awareness, right? So without that awareness, it can be very hard for some people to change in the long term. And the third F is finds. Now that you know what the feeling is, now that you know how food feeds that feeling, can you find now a non-food behavior to feed the same feeling? So if you're stressed out, it could be, maybe I'll run myself a bath instead of having ice cream. Or maybe I'll do 10 minutes of yoga from YouTube. Or, as we were saying before, if you're lonely, maybe actually you're better off phoning a friend or phoning your parents. For many of us, we use food instead of something else. And I've used that kind of, I've used that exercise with patients for many years now. And it's hard to change straight away, right? You can't necessarily change it the first time. But you just start to build in that awareness. So day after day, week after week. I was actually doing an interview last week, and the journalist said to me, she said, Dr. Chatterjee, that's so interesting, because 2 days ago I was driving home from work and I went into a fast food restaurant and had fried chicken and fries, right? Even though I'm trying not to, right? I had it. And that exercise now really makes sense to me, because I enjoyed it in the moment. I felt disgusting afterwards. I didn't sleep well. I woke up with a headache the next day. And she goes, now that you've just told me that exercise, now when I'm in that position next time, I'll just take a pause and really try and figure out what's going on. So, as you said about hunger, the first thing is, what do we truly hunger for? Now, if we are hungry for food, that's okay, right? If we're hungry for food, it's going to be very hard to resist eating if you're always hungry. Very, very hard if you're fighting hunger, which I know, Mark, you've always spoken about in your books, is like, let me help you eat in a way where you're not constantly fighting hunger, where you feel satisfied and full. And in the book, I write about something that I call Blissy Foods. So Blissy Foods are, these are the food products that are about as far away as possible from the real foods that both you and I like to promote people can eat. And so what are these Blissy Foods, right? These Blissy Foods are products that tend to have been designed by the food industry with these clever combinations of fat, sugar, and salt to be quite literally irresistible. And a lot of people don't really understand the neuroscience of this and what's really going on. So our brain is wired to uniquely respond to certain properties in food. So certain kinds of carbs, starch, sugar, protein, fat, salt, even the umami flavor that you get in cooked meats and broths and seaweeds. When you eat these foods in certain combinations, your brain releases a chemical called dopamine. And dopamine is the learning molecule. Dopamine helps to, dopamine does many things. It creates these feelings of intense reward in your brain. These really feel good, intense feelings of rewards. So much so that if you keep eating those foods, very soon the dopamine starts to get released in anticipation of eating those foods. So not even when you're eating them, the sight, the smell, being in the same location as you were before when you ate them. And actually, I find it useful to explain this to patients, because then they understand, oh, my biology is changing. My neurochemistry is actually starting to change. So that's why it can be so hard to resist when you're being exposed to those foods. And Mark, I had this patient in her 30s who was trying her best to eat well, right? She would buy cookbooks. She'd be motivated in her kitchen to cook. But you know what? In her job, it was really interesting. In her job, she'd often finish about 7:30 p.m. This is pre-pandemic. And she would drive home. And at one of the roundabouts, do you call them roundabouts?
Yeah,
like we
roundabouts.
Do in the UK?
Yeah.
Yeah, she would drive it, and at this roundabout, there would be a very well-known fast food restaurant there, and the smell of that food would permeate the air around that roundabout. And she said, Dr. Chatterjee, I'm trying my best, but at least 2 times a week, I'm tired, I'm stressed out after the day, that smell hits me, and I have this overwhelming feeling that I have to eat it, so I stop and eat it. And I explained to her about dopamine, and then I said to her, listen, is there an alternative route for you to drive home? And she said, yeah, but it will take me a good 10, 15 minutes longer. I said, you know what? For the next few weeks, I honestly want you to try this as an experiment. Take the other routes home. And so she started taking the other route home. She doesn't pass the junk food store, right? Temptation's not there. And I promise you, that was the only change we had to do, because suddenly she's no longer having to fight temptation. She gets home, cooks a healthy, wholesome meal, and over the next few months, she lost significant amounts of weight, and she didn't feel as though she was even trying. So again, with this personalized approach, Mark, that was the right approach for her. It may not be for me, it may not be for someone else, but for her, understanding dopamine allowed her to take a different route home.
Well, most of us don't really realize that the food that we eat has effects on our brain in ways that control our behavior, and that it's not a moral failing or some problem with your psychology, although sometimes it is a trauma, but sometimes it's just damn biology that hijacks you. and doing the things you said, you really literally can stop and end all those hunger cravings. So that's just great. One of the things that you also talk about is our environment, and I think this is something that most people don't understand is you can self-sabotage by having the wrong environment. So, for example, if I'm trying to get off coffee and I have coffee in my house, it's probably not a good idea. Or if I'm trying to get off ice cream and I got a freezer full of ice cream, probably a problem. So talk about how do we structure our environments for making our lives more effective in terms of achieving our goals, whether it's weight loss or anything else.
Yeah. Environment is arguably the number one thing to try and influence, because our environment influences our behavior so much more than we think. We kind of feel we've got, some sort of super willpower that we can resist all this temptation, but it's simply not true. Our environment influences our behavior so much. We know there's so much data on this. There's research showing that if you live within a half-mile radius of your house, if there are 6 fast food restaurants compared to 3, I think it's 40% more likely you're going to be overweight or obese. I think in schools, if they ban snacking in classrooms and in corridors, the BMI goes down on average by 11%. No one's changing, telling people what to eat. They're just saying you can only eat in the eating space in the canteen, right? You can't eat everywhere else. So our environment really influences this massively. So what can we do? Well, I've always said control the environments you can control, and I've heard you say this for years as well, Mark. It's like, let's not use willpower out there. I mean, it's hard out there. Make sure your house is a safe zone. So, I have a rule that in our house, we don't bring in the foods that I'm trying to avoid by and large. Now, if they ever do come in, you know what? I'm human just like everyone else. I can know the science. I can know about dopamine. But you have that stuff in the house. If I'm tired and stressed and the TV's on in the evening, I'm going to open the packet of chips or crisps, or biscuits just like anyone else.
Yeah. Biscuits means cookies in the UK for those listening.
Yeah. And so
Biscuit sounds healthy. Biscuit sounds healthy. You mean cookies.
I mean cookies. Yeah. But then also, what is the food you are going to expose yourself to in your environment? So, make sure it's fruit that you've got out. Make sure it's like, chopped carrots and hummus or whatever it is you want to be inputting signals into your brain. I'm not encouraging people to overeat more than they should be eating, but if you are going to have food around, make sure it's the food that's really going to help support your health and promote health and longevity, not the one that's going to take away from that. Your toaster, right? If you have a toast habit, put your toaster in a cupboard, right? Don't have it on the counter.
Forget it. Don't have the bread for the toaster. That's the big problem.
Yeah. So don't bring that into the house in the first place. But it's like, it's like trying to make the behaviors that you're trying to avoid, make it harder to do those behaviors, right? But then the behaviors you do want, right? Make it easier to do them. And, we spoke about this on when I came on your show last year, Mark, with my last book on habit change and 5-minute snacks. But, one of my favorite tips at the moment, frankly, for anyone, here in the UK, we're in a 3rd complete national lockdown. So pretty much everyone or most of the population are working from home, right? And it's really affecting people's mental health and well-being, especially in the dark British winter now. It's not like last March and April when it was springtime. It is dark. It is cold. People are really struggling. But one of my favorite tips, and it's also in the book, is that in your kitchen, right, if you have a kettlebell or you have a dumbbell, and many people do these days because in the lockdowns, they all sold out everywhere, I say keep it next to your coffee machine. Right, I can see you've got a coffee machine in the background there, Mark, in the image, right? Keep a dumbbell by your espresso machine. And here in the UK, if many people will have at least 3 hot drinks a day, a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, right? So I'm saying, okay, every time you go into your kitchen to make a hot drink, if all you do is lift up that dumbbell and do 5 bicep curls on each arm, right? If you have 3 hot drinks a day, you will lift that weight 30 times. In a week, that's over 200 times. In a month, that's nearly 1,000 times. And the beauty is, Mark, in the moment, it will feel like nothing. And why that's so powerful is it helps to build up your self-esteem, your resilience, you feel better about yourself. It's not like a 40-minute workout. Great if you can do that. But these small things, it's that feel great, lose weight. Do that every day. You're going to feel better about yourself, and that's going to ripple into other areas of your life. You're going to want to make better choices around your food. And I love that. I use that tip myself, and I don't have to lose weight. I do it because it helps improve how I feel about myself.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about, these tiny little steps that seem like nothing but add up. And this is really the science of behavior change. I know you've studied with BJ Fogg. He's been on my podcast. And there really is a science around incorporating simple changes that you want to do, that you're motivated to do, that you have the ability to do, and you need a trigger to do. So what you're talking about is something you're motivated to do a little exercise. You have the ability to do the exercise, and the trigger is having your drink, having your little cup of hot tea.
But it's also about having the weight visible. Let's make the food we don't want to.
Well, that's the trigger,
invisible.
right?
Yeah, like my wife and I for years have had a debate whether the dumbbell and kettlebell should be visible in the kitchen or it should be packed away tidily. And I said, right? If you want me to be buff, if you want your stud husband, you gotta let me have that out there in the kitchen on the counter, right? Hey, listen, from a health and safety perspective, I'm not asking people to have an accent, but I have to trip over my dumbbell to put my kettle on, which means even if all I do is lift it up to move it, I'm still lifting the weights. And so it's about applying behavior change to everything. It's about applying the rules of behavior change to everything we want, whether that's weight loss, mental health, physical, whatever it is. Don't try and think willpower will be enough, because in the long term, it rarely will be.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know how much you get into the book, but one of the challenges I find with people is that they spend days and hours, weeks researching like their vacation spot and rental, and what the restaurants are going to go to, and the airplanes are going to do, and what they're going to bring, and what they're going to pack, and everything they need. And most people don't give 5 minutes of thought to planning their nutritional week. What is my week going to look like? Where's my food going to come from? What do I have to get? How do I have to prepare it? How do I not end up in a food emergency? How do I have the things around that actually work? And I do it now automatically, but I understand it's not something that people normally have. So I have, for example, in the morning, I'm doing like a shake now. I'm trying to put on some muscle, and I'm just focusing on this super shake that I've been creating. But I have all the ingredients on the counter, and I make sure I have my bananas I buy or my frozen fruit that I buy, and it's in the freezer, and I have everything ready. So, and I buy extra jars of the macadamia milk. So I have everything just all there. So it's super quick and easy for me to do. But if I had to go shopping and I forgot this and I didn't do that, and it would be very difficult. And so I think sometimes it's even as extreme as people organizing their fridges with Tupperwares with pre-cut vegetables and pre-cut fruit and pre-cut all of these prepared things that are easy to make. And I see people who do that, and it's like, wow, that's even next level for me. But I just make sure that you have to think about what you're doing. You have to plan what you're doing, to plan your activity. And I think we don't schedule ourselves first, we schedule ourselves last, and then eating is an afterthought, and it just becomes well, I don't know, let me go get some this and something quick, or package this, or, just eat crap, whatever is there. And I think that's a challenge for people. So I think it's important that the environment, as you say, is structured to succeed as opposed to fail. And I think that's the take home. The other thing, I really want to get into, and this is challenging because right now during COVID, people are isolated alone. They may not have been great chefs or cooks before, or you can't go out to restaurants. Sometimes there's not even takeout anymore. And people have been, I think, taught that cooking is difficult, that eating healthy is expensive. Is this true? And how do you address the issues of, cooking and cost and feel great, lose weight?
Yeah, so there is a section on cooking and explaining just how important it is. It's that basic life skill that until recently, I'm pretty sure all families, all humans, all tribes would have had that ability. And it's something that is now optional. It can only have been optional because we have the ability to buy all these food products so quickly, so cheaply, and our lives are so busy, they're stressed out. A lot of us feel we don't have time to cook, and certainly in certain socioeconomic groups, I think we have to accept that actually it's not about money so much. It's about having the luxury of time to cook, which a lot of people will say, if I'm working 2 jobs, I don't have time to cook, right? So I think cost and time poverty is something we should be absolutely aware of. Now, I don't think, I think, the research, and I think, Mark, we spoke about this when you came on my podcast recently, is that it's simply not true that eating well has to be really, really expensive. Of course, there are certain things that are more expensive. There's no question. Like wild salmon, for example, is probably more expensive. But, a can of sardines is dirt cheap here in the UK. Do you know what I mean? There are ways that actually we can eat in a way that actually is whole food, but isn't super, super expensive. And I think where you live can really influence what's available, what you consider normal. We mentioned environment before, but our friend circle, our own sort of network of tribes, that's important as well. The research by Nicholas Christakis has shown that, someone in your social circle is obese, you're 45% more likely to be obese. If a friend of a friend is obese, you're 25% more likely to be obese. And if it's a friend of a friend of a friend, you're 10% more likely to be obese, which just shows just how powerful these social connections are and the environment, even our friends and family environment, is at influencing us. But it really isn't, Mark, as expensive as we think, or some people think it might be, to eat well. But you have to be able to cook, right? That is a basic skill. And if you cannot cook, that's okay, right? Recognize it and go. Learning to cook may be one of the most important things that you can learn to do, whether it's in one of your cookbooks, Mark, whether it's to go on YouTube. There is so many free and cheap resources now to teach people how to cook some basic meals. And, the truth is that the pandemic, for some people, not for everyone, but for some people, Mark, there's been a lot more time at home, a lot more time with family. And I know many people who have got into cooking during lockdowns, during these restrictions. Suddenly they're not commuting for 2.5 hours a day, and they're actually buying cookbooks and they're learning how to cook recipes. I've got to say, Mark, my new routine on a Sunday afternoon, which really has come in the last year. I love nothing more than this. On a Sunday afternoon, after lunch, right? I clear out the kitchen. I'm a bit old school. I put on a CD, and I've got a CD player in the kitchen. I put on one of my favorite CDs, and I cook a big batch of butternut squash soup to last us for the week, right? I've got lentils in it, butternut squash. It's got leeks, onions, ginger. I'm trying to think about the price of it, but lentils are dirt cheap, right? 2 or 3 butternut squashes are not that expensive. And apart from that, it's stock, leeks, onions, and ginger. It's kind of like that. Not only is it not expensive, but those 1.5, 2 hours are some of the most enjoyable times I spend in the week. I've got some great tunes on. I'm chilling. My daughter may be there drawing on the kitchen counter. We may be chatting at the same time. And at the end of it, there's the smell, there's the feeling that you're really connected with the food. And then that's going to go in the fridge. So in the week, if we ever need something for a meal, we can just go and heat that up. And so I'd really encourage people to find what works for them. Where is that moment in your week where you can actually find a bit of time to batch cook? If you are trying to cook something from scratch 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, that's where it can become really challenging. Not only is that a huge cognitive load, 21 times now I need to think about what I'm going to eat in just 1 week, right? So batch cook more. And one of the tips in the what we eat section is eat dinner for breakfast, right? It's such a simple thing that people haven't thought of before. It's like eating, you know what it's like, Mark. The breakfast foods that we often start our days with are literally setting ourselves up for hunger, for mood swings. And if you cook a bit extra at night, heat it up in the morning, have some salmon, sweet potatoes and broccoli in the morning sometimes if that's what you have the night before. And often people find that they're just not hungry until lunchtime. There was this case I had, someone who was having what he thought was healthy granola every morning. Sugar-filled granola. Yeah. He thought it was healthy, and he didn't really need to lose that much weight, but he found that his concentration was going, his focus was going. He'd get a bit shaky by 12 o'clock. And he started having, and this guy was vegetarian, right? And I remember it so well. He said, well, what shall I have? I said, well, what do you have in the evening? He goes, well, I love roast vegetables. I said, okay, what do you have with it? He says, goat's cheese. I said, well, okay, why don't you start there? So the next morning, he has goat's cheese with roast vegetable. And he said it got to 2 p.m. before he was even hungry. And he said, I didn't realize before that my concentration wasn't good and my energy wasn't good. It's only when I had a real food breakfast that I realized, oh, wow, I've been functioning suboptimally for years. And so, you know this as well as I do, Mark. I mean, there's plenty of tips on how people can do this inside the book. But, I really want to encourage people to take this rounded approach. If you have tried already and focused on one area and it's not been sustainable for you, let me help you figure out why that is. Maybe there's something else that you've not tackled that's actually the underlying root cause.
When you're physically active, you not only produce more immune cells, like there's natural killer cells, which I love the name, right? They're naturally killing things in your body. They kill, for example, cells that become infected with viruses, right? Cytotoxic T cells, again, an important part of your immune system, upregulated by physical activity. And not only you produce more of them, but there's compelling evidence that you redeploy them to vulnerable parts of your body. So when you go for a run, not only do you produce more of these cells, but you send them to the linings of your respiratory tract, which is, guess what, where we're vulnerable to COVID, right? To this SARS coronavirus. In addition, physical activity upregulates the humoral immune system, the antibody production. As people get older, their antibody production declines, but people who are more physically active have much healthier responses to vaccines and produce more antibodies. And again, for the same reason. And so by being physically inactive, we directly increase our vulnerability to respiratory tract infections. But physical activity also has indirect effects by making us more likely to be obese, to have metabolic syndrome, to have all the hypertensive, which are all the covariates that increase your risk to disease. So if we're going to fight this pandemic, one of the key ways to keep ourselves healthy is to stay physically active. That said, there's interesting evidence, and there's a big debate about whether too much activity opens a window and makes you vulnerable. And to be honest, there's not a lot of data because there's so few people who do too much that we just don't have a lot of data at that end of the curve. And it's still very debated. So within humans, there's not a lot of really good data, but in animal models, there certainly is. So I cite in the book a study that is really quite an extraordinary study. They gave mice a really virulent form of influenza. And then for the few days while the mice were coping with that influenza, before the symptoms emerged, while their immune system was initially dealing with it, some of the mice were sedentary. Some of the mice, they had them exercise like 20 minutes a day. And some of those poor little mice, they had them exercise like 2 hours a day. And the ones who exercised moderately had less than half the mortality rate of the sedentary mice. But the ones who exercised ridiculous amounts had much higher mortality rates than the sedentary mice. And to me, I think that highlights, what every physician knows, which is that, some is good, but be careful. Don't overdo it because you're going to deplete your body of energy. And then if there's less energy than which in your immune system takes a lot of energy, you could potentially harm yourself. So really, as we deal with the physical problems, the physical health, the mental health of this pandemic, but also just our immune health, staying physically active is just absolutely crucial right now.
I love the bit about grandparents in the book.
Thank you.
And
that's my favorite section.
It was such a wonderful bit to read about. And I wonder if you could just sort of expand on it and why it's so important for us to remember, because many people, I think, as they get older, think that they should actually become less active. And you're sort of saying that may not be the case. Yeah,
this is something we're working on further right now. But to me, I think it's maybe the most important part of the book in a way, which is that we have this idea that as you get older, it's time to kick up your heels and, move to Florida or whatever it is, right? And just kind of be less active and take it easy and, enjoy your retirement. But, humans are unusual species. We're one of the few species that evolved to live after we reproduce. We evolved to be grandparents. But we didn't evolve just to be grandparents, to enjoy our grandchildren. We evolved to be grandparents to help our grandchildren. So if you look in the hunter-gatherer societies and in farming societies, grandparents are out there foraging and hunting and gathering and digging and doing all kinds of stuff, and helping out their children and their grandchildren, providing food surplus, helping, being active. And in fact, we have data showing that people often are more active when they're grandparents than when they're parents, because they don't have kids in tow, right? And what's important about that, it's kind of like a chicken and egg question, which came first, living long in order to be active, or being active in order to live long? And they're both there, right? And it turns out that physical activity is really important in slowing processes of aging and decreasing disease, because when you're physically active, you turn on all kinds of repair and maintenance mechanisms, right? So when you're active, you stress your body, you produce reactive oxygen species, you generate heat, you turn up your sympathetic nervous system, your fight and flight nervous system, but then you spend energy after you're exercising to deal with all that, right? We produce antioxidants, we produce molecules to fix all the proteins that we damaged because they got affected by heat. We lower our blood temperature. We turn on our parasympathetic, rest and digest system to lower the sympathetic activity. We turn on all these mechanisms that keep our bodies repaired and maintained. And the trick is that because we never evolved not to be physically active, we never evolved to turn on these mechanisms in the absence of physical activity. We need that stress to mount the anti-stress response. And so physical activity, this is really at the heart of the book. This is why physical activity is so good for us. It turns on all kinds of good processes in our body that keep us from aging and keep us from getting sick. And so as we get older, that becomes even more important, right? You want to keep your muscles healthy. You want to keep your chromosomes healthy. You want to keep your cells from deteriorating. You want to keep the mitochondrial numbers up in your muscles. The list goes on and on and on. And that's why physical activity is so important. So as we get older, it becomes even more important to stay physically active, because and of course the data are there. We know the epidemiological data. We know the mechanistic data, but we don't have this sort of cultural idea that as we age, that's the time to keep up the activity, not turn it down.
So why is it, when the data and the science is really clear that, as you say, 150 minutes of physical activity each week will have multiple benefits, or let me rephrase that, may have multiple benefits on your well-being and your longevity, why do so many of us struggle to do that? Because
it's abnormal. I mean, our instincts are constantly pulling us not to exercise. I mean, our instincts are deep and they're powerful. I mean, for millions of years, our ancestors struggled to get enough energy to eat, right? Every day they had to work. They didn't go crazy hard. They didn't like work 8 hours a day on their feet, struggling to get enough food. They average hunter-gatherers seem to work, moderately hard for about 2.5 hours a day, 2.25 hours a day and then light tasks for the rest of the day. And they sit as much as we do, around 9 to 10 hours a day. But that gave them just enough food to survive. There are no obese hunter-gatherers, right? And if they were to go for, like what I did this morning, go for a long run just for the hell of it in the morning, they would then waste all that energy, which they could use towards reproduction and the things that natural selection cares about. So nobody in the Stone Age ever went for a morning run for the fun of it. And it's a bad idea. And whenever you have a chance to save energy, you should, until recently. And now we live in this really strange, interesting modern world, wonderful in all kinds of regards, where we can, spend our entire day without ever getting our heart rate up, press buttons to get food and shopping carts and I don't even have to move my hand when I brush my teeth if I didn't want to. I get an electric toothbrush, right? I mean, everything is mechanical, and the result is that we no longer have to be physically active, and we now have to do something really weird, which is to choose to be physically active. And although we know up here, right, in our brains that it's good for us, all kinds of instincts just kick in to tell us not to. I think the best evidence for that are when you have like a stairway next to an escalator, right? You must see them. Yeah. They're in tube stops all over the place, and in airports everywhere. We all know this phenomenon, right? And it doesn't matter where you are in the world. People have studied this in Japan and in Denmark and in America and in Israel and various places. Wherever there is a stairway next to an escalator, less than 5% of people take the stairway. And if you put a sign up, that just goes up just a wee bit, right? If you put escalators in the Kalahari Desert, they would take the escalator there too. It's an instinct.
Yeah, and I think what you just said there about the Kalahari Desert really, I think it brings it to life for people, because a lot of people feel bad. They feel guilt. They feel shame that they're not moving as much as either their doctor has told them, the news has asked them to do, or even people they're following on social media who, post a photo, hey, just in my 10K run before breakfast, how are you all doing today? That kind of meme, which I think if you find it inspiring and you're like, oh man, I didn't do anything, I want to do that, great. But for many people, they watch that and day in, day out, they're feeding their brains with that, thinking, I'm some kind of failure. Like, look at all these people who can move their body every day and are vibrant and are full of energy, yet just getting through the day is a real struggle. And I think that's one of the beautiful things in your book, is that you help people not to feel bad about it. You're sort of arguing that we've not evolved to exercise. Absolutely.
We didn't. Look, we also didn't evolve to go to school, right? I mean, we didn't, until recently, almost nobody read, and nobody, of course, schools didn't exist, right? I mean, there are so many things of our modern world that are good for us. I mean, no parent thinks that sending their kid to school is bad and they shouldn't learn, that their kids shouldn't learn to read. But that's also a modern abnormal thing. And think about how we get school to work, right? We make it compulsory, but we also try to make it fun too, right? We have recess and all kinds of, you meet your friends there, and we try to make school both fun and necessary. And I think we should treat exercise the way we treat education, because it's a modern abnormal thing, but it's good for us. And we should make it necessary, but we should also try to make it fun. But the last thing we should do is make people feel bad about it, because making people feel bad about doing what's natural for them doesn't help anybody. I think the same thing goes with dieting, right? Yeah. I mean, we never evolved to lose weight. But a lot of people are trying to lose weight, and for good reason. But when they fail on their diet, it's not because of some moral failing. It's because there are hundreds of adaptations in their bodies which want to hold on to that fat, and elicit a kind of a fast, an energetic crisis in their bodies to hold on to that energy. And it's not their fault that they're having a hard time losing weight. It's the fault of their biology, and yet we then blame them and make them feel bad. And I think we need to understand that our bodies we don't just get to decide what we do with our bodies. Our bodies are evolved and over millions and millions of generations, and we need to be compassionate and understand that and work with our biology to find better solutions. I mean, what we've done with exercise is we've medicalized it, and I have nothing wrong with the medical profession, obviously. I almost became a physician myself, but most doctors' job is to treat people when they're sick, not to prevent them from getting sick. And that's part of the medical system as a whole. That's another issue. But the other thing we've done with exercise is we've commercialized it. We've industrialized it. We've commodified it. We tell people to just do it, right? And again, there's nothing wrong with medicalizing exercise. There's nothing wrong with commercializing and industrializing exercise. But clearly, it's not enough, because like in the United States, I don't know what the data are in England. I've been trying to find good data in England. There's not as much, but in the United States, only 20% of Americans actually exercise in their leisure time. That's a really staggering number, right? There are people who are physically active, but not many people actually get out and do it. And there's a reason for that. It's not because they're lazy or bad or should feel guilty or ashamed. They're just being normal human beings.
It really is wonderful to have someone with your pedigree. You're such an esteemed, highly respected researcher, professor. You're basically saying we need to be kind to ourselves. We need to be compassionate to ourselves. You're making the case with, for physical activity and exercise that we need to be compassionate to ourselves. But I love what you said there about trying to lose weight. We've not evolved to lose weight. And what you just said, what you just mentioned there is a sort of central case I've been writing about over the last few months for my next book, which is on weight loss. And I very much agree. We have to be kind and compassionate to ourselves and understand we're kind of fighting our biology. The environment in which we live is very much so removed from the environment in which we've evolved that therefore, we're not doing anything necessarily wrong. We're just doing what humans have always done. Humans have always tried to make things easy, right? We've always looked for high calorie, energy dense foods to, you know, for as little energy as possible. It just so happens now that on my smartphone, I can go on a shopping app and have that delivered to my house without actually moving anywhere. So I think it really does help people feel better. I read an article with you, Daniel, recently that I think you wrote in the British press. And you said in it that you were the kid who never got picked for the sports team at school. Yet here we are with having a conversation, and it's early your time. What is it, 7:30, 7:45, something like
no, it's 8:30. It's not that early.
8:30,
right?
but
yeah.
You've already been for a run. And that made me think about what you've just said about we've got to make it fun for people. We've got to, you know, we made school compulsory, but we also try and make it fun. And you're sort of making a similar case for exercise. So is part of the problem also, like with you, and you've obviously overcome that and you are still someone who moves regularly, but many people have that experience at school. They're not picked for the teams. They're made to feel shame and bad about themselves, that they can't be sporty like their friends who have been picked in the team. And that puts them off moving their bodies for life.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was lucky because although I was terrible, and I really was picked last for sports. I for example, played on a soccer team. You call it football. And in my town that I grew up in, there was a really good soccer town. And so there were kids on my team who were so much better than me. I just sat on the bench. You know, I almost never got to play because I wasn't very good. And you know, I felt very insecure about my body, but I was lucky that I had parents who loved to hike and we went skiing in the winter, cross country skiing, and my mother, you know, jogged, and my father jogged too. And so they were physically active, but they didn't play sports. I don't think they ever watched any sports event ever. I don't think. I played tennis a bit, but you know, that was, you know, I had to walk to a tennis court. That was fine, but you know, they weren't interested in any of that. I don't think they ever came to any game I was ever in, partly because I sat on the bench, right? But so I kind of grew up thinking it was sort of normal to be physically active, but not interested in sports. But so much of physical activity that kids encounter is sports. And sports, you know, there's a whole chapter in my book on sports. Sports can have exercise, but it doesn't always have exercise. And that exercise isn't always necessarily healthy. Look at American football. I mean, that's a really profoundly unhealthy sport. And we have more and more data to show that, not just in terms of concussions, but also in terms of heart disease and other kinds of problems that arise from you know, bulking up, making these sort of sumo wrestler sized sort of linemen in the sport. But we, you know, we could do a better job of making it fun. I mean, some schools do that, and making sure it's about fitness. I mean, my university, Harvard, has you know, a huge athletics program. We have 40 teams, one of the largest athletic programs in the United States, even though this is not a powerhouse school in terms of athletics. But the athletics department really mostly serves the athletes on campus, and their job isn't really that much to get the other 80% of students to be physically active. And surprise, surprise, the vast majority of Harvard students, about 75%, don't meet the minimum level of physical activity that you would need in the United States. And that's partly because we don't make it fun for them. You know, there's no opportunities for them. And probably all of them would like to do more exercise, but they're busy and they're stressed and they've got courses and classes and they don't have to do it. And you know, we could do a much better job of helping them be active. And they want us to do a better job of helping them be active. It's not something you can just snap your fingers and do on your own.
It's an interesting dilemma, isn't it? That we look up to these incredible athletes with superhuman performances. You know, the American footballers, let's say, in the States, or you know, Eliud Kipchoge, the runner who can, you know, run a marathon, frankly, in a time that just makes me shudder even thinking about the fact that he can do that in under 2 hours. But there's a difference, isn't there? It's the case you're sort of making, that's kind of elite performance. It doesn't mean that's healthy. It doesn't mean that's what we should all be striving for. And I think why I find that interesting is because, have you heard of park run? You familiar
Yes,
with
of
park
course.
run?
Yeah, no, it's wonderful, park run.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
but I mean, I'd love to talk about park run at some point because there are so many aspects there: community, the social aspect to moving together, whether it's run, walk, whether it's walk, whether it's running. But you also get timed at a park run, and I've often wondered: is timing it a good idea or not? Because loads of people who suffer with mental health problems, park run is actually what really, really helps them, that strong sense of community. You're moving, even if you're a volunteer at that park run, you still get a lot of benefits. But I wonder then, when the timing comes in, and I'm not against it, I'm just sort of posing the question, does that start to make us think about performance and taking us away from just doing it because it's a fun thing to do for some of us?
Yeah. I mean, I think we, there's so many different motivations that people have, and I think we need to embrace them all, right? For some people, timing is great. It gives them a little impetus. It gives them, it helps them, do a little better and, challenge themselves. Other people find it defeating and off-putting. And so I think, we should let 1,000 kinds of physical activity bloom, right? And if there's never going to be one type, right? Yeah. For some people, why not just dancing? I mean, I have a section in the book on dancing.
You do, and I've got that written down to talk to you about because I didn't know that at all. So please do expand on that. It was a brilliant section.
Yeah, I mean, every culture in the world, I can't find an exception, has not only just dancing, but endurance dancing as part of its culture. People dance for hours in just about every culture. And even in Jane Austen, I found some wonderful quotes in Jane Austen and, George in England, where people, dance the night away, right? It's a way of making physical activity, and they probably didn't think of it as exercise. It was social. It was fun. So there are many, many ways for us to get our bodies moving and to get the benefits, the mental health benefits, the physical health benefits. And I think we should, if we're going to be successful, we need to try to, there's not going to be one size fits all approach, right? There's going to have to be many approaches. I mean, look, there are some people, as you know, because you read the book, throughout the book, I make fun of treadmills, because treadmills are, for me, the apotheosis of exercise. Here's a machine. You have to spend money to buy it or spend money to go to the gym to use it. It makes you work hard to basically stay in the same place. You get nothing done. It's loud. It's noisy. The air is fetid. I mean, I put people on treadmills for a living, but I hate treadmills. I mean, I have one in my basement. I sometimes use it. So what some people do is they listen to a podcast, or maybe this podcast, or they'll watch a movie or whatever to tolerate the treadmill. And if that works for them, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. If it's actually very efficient, you can do two things at once. You can listen to a podcast and get some exercise at the same time, but others just can't stand it. So let's not be judgmental. Any way that works is great. I mean, and we just have to support them all.
I'm a big fan of individualized and personalized approaches, and I really like that idea that maybe we've got to broaden out what we recommend to people. Say, it doesn't matter how you move your body, but you just want to move it more and find what actually works for you. But are there any sort of universal principles when it comes to movement that actually do work for all of us?
In terms of getting us to move? I mean, I go back to the simple, I mean, I think there's two basic impetuses that have, over millennia have been the basis for how and why people move. And one is because it's necessary, and the other is because it's fun. And for most people, fun involves social. Sometimes going for a run by yourself or a walk by yourself is meditative, and it's nice to be by yourself and you can think through a problem. But for most of us, we like to be with other people. And so that's why Park Run is so successful. It's social. Here in Cambridge, we have the November Project. Every Wednesday, people do these wonderful runs and they run up the stadium and they do all kinds of great stuff. Wow. We have, all around the world, there are various kinds of social events. There, dancing is social. Playing a game of, soccer or football is social. I mean, the list goes on, right? And there are many ways to do it socially. And I think, so that's critical. But that's never going to be enough for some folks. And and exercise, physical activity used to be necessary in our lives, and that was the impetus that people had to get out and every day and do work. And so we need to find ways, without coercing them unethically, to make exercise, to make physical activity necessary. And because it's not appropriate to tell adults that they can't have the benefits of society unless they exercise, right? We need to help people help themselves. And I think the way to do that is through what's called a commitment contract. So let me go again back to education. In education, education works on a commitment contract basis for adults, right? So I'm a professor in a university where people pay ghastly sums to go to Harvard, right? I mean, I think the tuition is, and room and board and all that costs like $60,000 to $70,000 a year. That's full. Of course, most students don't end up paying that. I mean, the vast majority get financial aid. So don't worry. Most of my students are not fabulously wealthy. Actually, many of them are first generation students because we're lucky we have really good financial aid. But anyway, somebody's paying $60,000 to $70,000 every year for them to go to school. And there's some commitment from them to go to school. And what are they doing? They're having people like me torture them, right? I make them take exams. I make them read books. I make them stay up late at night studying. And if they don't do well, I give them a bad grade, which stigmatizes them for the rest of their life. But they do it willingly because they've signed a kind of a commitment contract. Whereas they're paying money for me to make them do stuff which they know is good for them, which they otherwise wouldn't do for themselves. And we do all kinds of other commitment contracts in our world, and I think exercise should be part of that. We should find exercise. There are many. So there's a wonderful program called Stick.com. It's a website run through some economists. They used to be at Yale. I'm not sure if they're still at Yale, where you can basically pick either a carrot or a stick, right? And I describe this in the book because because there's a friend of mine in San Francisco who's been trying to lose weight. And she gave Stick.com, I think, $2,000. So not a small amount of money. And every week she agreed that she was going to walk a certain number of miles. And if she didn't get those number of miles in, and her husband was a referee, if she didn't do those miles, as affirmed by her husband, they would automatically send $50 that week to the National Rifle Association. That's the big association that tries to prevent gun control laws in the United States. And she is very, very much hates the NRA and wants to see gun, and she has never missed a week of her walking since she's been doing that. So she signed a commitment contract, put some money behind it. Now that's a kind of an extreme one, but there are other ways we can do it, just through a friend. I mean, a lot of my early morning runs, I don't, at 6 a.m., I do not want to run, I promise you. I mean, no, but I want to be in bed with my wife, right? But I often meet a friend of mine who's a cardiologist, and he's at 6 a.m., and he doesn't want to be there either. But we kind of agreed the day before that we were going to meet each other at 6 a.m. To go for a run. And usually we're just like irritated at each other and we don't even speak for the first, 10 minutes. And then slowly we warm up, and I'm never unhappy that I did that run at the end. But I did it because I coerced myself through a commitment contract.
Yeah. Very, very practical and pragmatic approach. I guess what you're saying is that the way we've typically encouraged physical activity has been, very prescriptive. You have to do this. If you don't do it, you're not really looking after yourself. You sort of have to rely. We're very much putting it down to individual motivation, individual willpower. And what you're saying, I guess, is that this is not working. Right? We've not evolved to exercise. We're now living in a society where we simply don't have to anymore. That necessity has gone. So you need to find a way to make it necessary. And the way you found of doing it is you're meeting someone. So if your buddy has gone to the trouble of getting up early in the morning and goes to your agreed spot and you don't show up, there is a bit of, you have social pressure to show up, which is why so many movement programs talk about, doing it with other people. Your story is super inspiring, and everything you do really now is about helping people understand their relationship with alcohol. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. It's trying to present a different message around alcohol, that actually it's not this thing that you need to give up. You actually gain a massive advantage by taking a break. So it's a new message. It's a fresh message. It's not fire and brimstone or pointing the finger. It's like, just take a break and see what happens, and if you get stunning results, keep going. And that's really starting to resonate with people.
Yeah. No, I love it. And I guess, you started today talking about Edinburgh. And we'll probably circle back to Edinburgh a bit later, because Edinburgh is where I was a student. And I think my own relationship with alcohol was very much formed in Edinburgh. And so I think there is some sort of nice, there's something there that actually we met also in Edinburgh for the first time. So why don't you talk about your relationship with alcohol? What happened? Let's rewind back a few years, I don't know when it was now, when you started that journey of re-examining your relationship.
Yeah, for me, it was very clear. It was in my mid-30s. I'd sort of reached that conventional place where happiness apparently resides. I had the car and the big job and the lovely family and all those type of trappings. And I remember reaching this place thinking, I feel a bit average. I think like many people, like a 5 out of 10, I was overweight, stressed out, maxed out, unfit, unhealthy. And as part of that process, I decided to leave my job as a broker to start a new firm, because I was convinced there has to be more to life than this. When I looked around the rest of the city, I saw people that were, quote unquote, more successful than me, broken bodies, broken minds, broken homes. And I was like, I don't aspire to that. What's the point? I want to do something different. I want to come back. I want to build a foundation of wellness and vitality. And from there, peak performance. So I had 9 months off, which was fantastic gardening leave. I traveled the world. I trained for the best of the best, co-founder of NLP, Rich Roll, Sarah Campbell, the world champion freediver, just to learn everything I could about wellness and vitality. And when I came back to start this new business, I was going to meditate and I was going to eat salad and stuff. I was in that type of mindset. But I was totally inconsistent. I was inconsistent in the way that I exercised. I was inconsistent in the way that I showed up in the office. This inconsistency was everywhere. And finally, the penny dropped. I thought, it's alcohol. But it was the last thing that I ever questioned. And I see this all the time. I'd looked at meditation. I'd looked at my diet. I'd looked at exercise. I never questioned alcohol.
It's the elephant in the room.
Exactly.
About health. And it's something that is almost such an established part of culture, certainly in this country, but in many countries around the world also, that we think about all the other things we can change, but our relationship with alcohol stays the same. We don't touch that. That's a given, right? Yeah. But it's like, oh yeah, I might sort of stress out a little bit about my diet or movement or meditation, but my alcohol intake, that's a no-go area. That is a given. And I think that, for me, that's really... It's quite interesting because my own relationship with alcohol has changed dramatically over the last few years. And no doubt we'll get into that. But let's go back again. So you said you were a banker.
Yeah.
And so, I'm sort of going to project here that you're probably earning good money.
Yep.
From the outside, people would look at your life and go, he's doing really well. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, on paper, you would have said, that guy's crushing it. He's got the great cars and houses, all the traditional sort of stuff. But inside, I was struggling. And I think that's the case for so many people. Outwardly, they present this persona that they're doing very well, but inwardly, they're struggling a bit mentally and physically. I was definitely suffering.
Was there a particular moment? You've mentioned when the penny dropped, but I don't know, banker culture, from what I know of some of my friends from university who've gone down that road, and just from seeing what I've seen, alcohol, socializing fuels a lot of that industry from what I can tell.
Oh, absolutely. But what's interesting, since I've got into this, it's not just banking or broking that I was in, or trading, it's media. It's in all these different, it's in insurance, it's in it's quite ubiquitous how widespread the use of alcohol is to entertain and socialize and do all those things. And as you said, it's the elephant in the room. It's the one thing that no one ever really questions. They question their diet and they question their meditation, they question the way they move their body, and they sort of forget to actually look at this thing underneath, which is alcohol, that's tripping people up. So for me, there wasn't ever a big sort of never again moment. It was just a slow realization of, I think this is holding me back. I was suspecting that alcohol was preventing me being my best self. It was preventing me getting from that 5 out of a 10 in terms of happiness or wellness to a 7 or an 8. And sort of spoiler alert, it absolutely was.
Yeah. So why should someone who's listening to this podcast, why should they start to question their relationship with alcohol, do you think?
I think it's one of these, and I do a lot of corporate talks, which I love doing. I was at Adobe last week, the software giant Amazon the week before, and the talk there is all about tactical breaks from alcohol as a vehicle to elite performance. So what I'm trying to portray by that message is very much that I think everyone should just take a break, just run that experiment, because you might not know how much it's holding you back until you remove it. Because I think it's things like consistency. It takes away that consistency, even if you're only drinking once or twice a week. And just to set my stall out, I am talking to the middle lane drinkers. I class myself as a middle lane drinker. And what I mean by that is someone that drinks moderately, sometimes averagely, sometimes heavily, which is basically everyone. You know, that is the group that I'm talking to, because I think for too long there's been this black and white message around alcohol. It's either you have a full-blown problem or you don't. There's no in between. I think it needs to be this gradient where we think about alcohol as a whole spectrum, and everyone who drinks is on that gradient. At one end, it's the very moderate drinker once a month. The other end is the problematic drinker. And most people spend all of their time oscillating somewhere in the middle, don't they? I think they're average, sometimes moderate, sometimes heavy. That's the group of people I'm talking to.
I think that's the most powerful part of your message, that idea that it's not black or white. I think many people are walking around, and many of my patients are coming in with a problematic relationship with alcohol, and they wouldn't conventionally They wouldn't call themselves an alcoholic, you know, and depending on how you define that, I would agree that they're not alcoholics. You know, a lot of people think that, they're not waking up needing a drink. They're not falling out of nightclubs every day at 4 a.m. or whatever. You know, they don't have a problem with alcohol. They just come back from work and, you know, they'll have a half a bottle of wine. Well, they start off with a glass to de-stress from the day. That glass becomes 2, 3 glasses. And that happens Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. What happens is what I call the ripple effect. So, you drink a bit more than you ideally wanted to unwind from the stresses of the day, but then your sleep gets trashed.
Exactly.
So you don't sleep well, and then the next day you're feeling groggy. So you need more caffeine and more sugar to get you through. You're more stressed at the end of the day. So what do you need? You need, again, the alcohol. And you're almost in this vicious cycle that until you stop, you don't really realize how good you could feel. But that's literally what happened to you. I mean, what happened? How did you come up with the idea? I tell you what, I'm going to take a break for 30 days. What happened there, and why 30 days?
Initially, because that's all I could muster. You know, and this is where the whole genesis of One You Know Beer comes from. I didn't have a problematic relationship with alcohol in that traditional sense.
Hold on, I'm going to pull you up on that, right? Yeah. So, when was the last time you had a drink?
6 years ago.
6 years ago, right? And you, at that time, were saying to yourself that you don't have a problematic relationship with alcohol, and certainly by conventional standards.
Yeah.
If I ask you to reflect now, given all the changes in your life, how you've improved your health, your well-being, your performance, your cognition, I'm guessing relationships, right? Would you look back now and still say you didn't have a problematic relationship?
Well, no, I think the way I look at it is to say that, was I drinking too much? Absolutely. But so's everyone else. I think it's been so socially ubiquitous that everyone's on this level playing field of drinking too much. So did it feel exceptional or problematic? Absolutely not at the time. But you're dead right. On reflection, I was drinking far too much. Again, but so are most people that are stuck in that sort of loop that you're talking about. And it doesn't even have to be every day. It could be once or twice a week. But that once or twice a week destroys your sleep. And we know you've had some brilliant people, Matthew Walker on the podcast, that talks about alcohol and sleep. That destroys your performance. It destroys your mental health, destroys your productivity from 1 or 2 times a week. And I think what people don't realize, the knock-on effect is for a couple of days. So even if you think about it and you're doing the maths, right? If you're drinking twice a week and it takes you out for a couple of days, you're losing over 50% of your life, of your performance to underperformance due to the fog of alcohol, even if it's only a couple of drinks.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I guess if someone had told you 6 years ago, hey, Andy, look, you're drinking too much, right? You're going to, in 6 years' time, have not touched a drop of alcohol for 6 years. You probably would have laughed in their face. Thought, what are you talking about?
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
I mean, so the goal for you was never to stop drinking. And I think that's very powerful. So you never planned to completely stop drinking. And I'm not saying you have completely stopped. Obviously, for 6 years, you've not had one. I don't know how you would talk about yourself and your relationship with alcohol now. And I think that's what you're offering people, isn't it? You're offering people, it's not about giving up necessarily. It's almost as if you're trying to say, hey, look, let's give it a go. Why don't you see how you feel when you don't drink? And is that all you're asking people to do?
Exactly. That's it. In a nutshell, I choose not to drink because why would I? But prior to that, I stopped and started many times. I slipped up and stumbled and fumbled. And just, the co-founder of One Beer, Ruri Fairbairns, he drinks every now and again in full control on his own terms. So I'm all about people drinking if they wish to. But what I really want everyone to do is to run the test and see the results that you get. And if you feel amazing, keep going. So back to those talks that I deliver, I talk about people doing a split test on themselves or an A and B test effectively. A, you with alcohol right now, gather your stats, BMI, weight, resting heart rate, all those wonderful physiological stats, and then the subjective stats, productivity, time, motivation, stress, your relationships. Run the test for 28 days. That's all you've got to do. I prefer 90 days because I think you get better results. And when you think about it, 90 days, a 90-day break from alcohol over the average drinking career is about 0.49%. Everyone's got 0.49% just to run the test. And if you get the results and you have this visceral experience of these improvements and you've got more time, you've got more motivation, you've got more productivity, you've lost weight and all these wonderful things, then the answer's in the data, the answer's in the visceral experience. And then my job's done. All I've got to do is help people start, keep them going for long enough to have their own experience, then their relationship's transformed.
I find that term you just mentioned, your drinking career, I find that interesting. Because I've used that term, I've heard that term, and in many ways, language often gives us so much insight into how we view something in society. And even that idea of a drinking career, it's a pretty remarkable phrase, isn't it, really?
Yeah. And this is what I think culturally we've got this sort of blind spot to alcohol. It's just sort of crept up on us. And the people that I worry about most are genuinely the 30 to 60-year-old, that bracket that have grown up in that sort of lad culture of alcohol. And it's just part of how we celebrate, commiserate, days that end in Y, first birthdays, second birthdays, 40th birthdays. It's just imbued with alcohol. And that's why I worry about that group of people that are not problematic in the sense, but they're just grinding the gears constantly of having this long-term drinking career that is affecting them. They just don't realize it.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you stopped drinking, when you went on that trial, were you still working as a banker?
As a broker, yes, absolutely.
As a broker, excuse me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I found it incredibly difficult. And I remember there was one really annoying colleague of mine when I made the big announcement, I'm going to take, a 28-day break from alcohol. He laughed and said, there's no way in a million years you'll ever last a month. And he was right. I didn't, because I found myself in this socially pressured environment and, with well-worn habit loops and routines around drinking. And it's really difficult to switch that off, especially I found that in a social setting. So I made every mistake in the alcohol-free book. I stumbled and fumbled, but what was interesting, I wanted to learn from it. I was intrigued. I wanted to understand my brain. That's why I ended up going back and doing degrees and master's degrees to understand how the brain worked so that I could actually understand how I could show people and help people to take a break and change their behavior in those socially pressurized environments.
So you said that when you decided to do that, you made an announcement. And so you're right, and we'll dig into societal and social pressure because I think that keeps many of us locked in certain behaviors, particularly around alcohol, that we may otherwise not choose to do. But did you feel the need to make an announcement? Was it something, for example, you could have just done yourself? Or, it's interesting, isn't it, that you felt that actually I have to tell people, I have to make a thing of this and say to everyone around me, hey, I'm taking 28 days off alcohol.
Yeah, I had to because I needed something to cling to, almost an excuse, which is ridiculous when you think about it. Here I am trying to make this really proactive change in my life to be a better performer in terms of, how I work and be fitter and faster and all those wonderful things. And I've got to excuse myself because I'm trying to do it. And I think, again, that's the way that alcohol is viewed in society. It is the only drug in the world. When you try and give it up, you get slaughtered for it.
Oh, man.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Well, let's go into that. So when did you first have a drink, right? Where did you grow up? Was drinking a part of your family culture growing up? And when was the first time you had a drink or started to drink heavily, would you say, if you can remember?
Oh, yeah. I think around 13, I would have had a couple of drinks, here and there.
With your mates?
Yeah, sort of stuff. Typical teenagey growing up stuff. It was never excessive. And I was a professional footballer. So I left school at 16 to play professional football. So really from 16 to 22, I would drink occasionally after games, but it wasn't a big thing in my life at all. It was all about football and nothing else.
Yeah.
So then I travelled the world with my now wife, which was fantastic. And of course, I was let loose then. I didn't have the restriction of games on a Saturday. I got injured, unfortunately, when I was 21. So my career was ended by the time I was 23. And then I started to drink normally, like everyone else, flowed into the city. And just, again, I wasn't exceptional in the way that I was drinking. I was pretty much normal. It was just too much because everyone in that environment is drinking too much.
Yeah. I guess we're all products of our environment, aren't we?
Yeah.
Ultimately, when we can talk about personal empowerment, and I think, of course, that's important. But, really the environment in which we live, the people with whom we surround ourselves with, ultimately that dictates so many of our choices. And actually to go against that, to go against the grain, you got to be pretty strong. You got to be pretty secure in yourself, because the easiest thing is to do what everyone else around you is doing.
Oh, it's totally. And I think social pressure is huge when it comes to alcohol. We ran a survey in conjunction with Stirling University of 2,000 people, and 97% said, right, which is a staggering result, 97% of people said the number one reason they don't take a break from alcohol more often is because they felt socially pressured. 85% of them said that they felt socially pressured at work to drink. And I think people underestimate the power of social pressure in the sense that from an evolutionary standpoint, we've got this inbuilt instinct to remain part of the tribe.
Yeah.
It's so powerful. So when people assume that it's just a normal drinks night, there's a ton of pressure going on there that people can't quite see, but it's there, that I think is encouraging people to behave in ways that, they probably don't want to.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, if I reflect on my own relationship with alcohol, so I grew up, and occasionally mum would have a glass of wine in front of the telly. I've got a happy memory of my dad, especially because my dad's not here anymore. On a Friday night, he'd be in our kitchen. The radio would be on. He'd probably have Radio 4 on, something like that, or Classic FM, which is what my dad used to listen to. And he'd be ironing, and he'd have a lager and lime often. That was, I think, his relaxation on a Friday night. Listen to Radio 4, have a pint of lager and lime, and do some ironing. But I guess culturally, we didn't drink that much. I didn't see my parents drink that much. It was now and again. And I think probably at school, I'm guessing when I was 16 or 17, when you get together with your mates, you have a few drinks because everyone around you's doing it. And, I know looking back now, I was, like many teenagers, very insecure in who I was and really trying to fit in and do what the tribe around you is doing to feel one of the gang, right? And I'm sure many people start like that. But moving back to Edinburgh, at the age of 18, I left the northwest of England to go 240 miles away to Edinburgh at medical school, and got there and moved into halls of residence, and it was Freshers Week. And, I don't remember that much about Freshers Week, if I'm honest, and there's obviously a reason why. But I remember, I remember drinking something. I think it was a pint of lager. And I don't think I'd really drunk much lager up to that point. I think I'd had a couple of sips of my dad's lager and lime, but the lime makes it super sweet, right? So yeah. I'm at uni, away from home, probably feeling a bit homesick, trying to fit in. And I have a pint of, I don't know, Carling or something. I can't remember what was served in the uni bar. I didn't really like it, right? But you know what? Everyone around you's drinking it. So you power through. Right, you power through until you finish your pints.
Yeah.
And then before you know it, by the end of the week, you quite like it because every night you're at events and everyone around you is drinking, multiple pints, and it's the thing to do. And it's an interesting idea, isn't it, that we don't actually like something, but we keep persevering. I mean, how many people honestly like lager or wine the very first time they have it? I don't know if this has come up in your Facebook groups or not. I mean, how many people actually like it the very first time?
I think it's probably zero.
Yeah.
It's the truth.
You acquire that taste, you learn it. It's a learned habit. And so for me, obviously uni and medics in general have a very, I don't know if people are all aware of this, but medics are big drinkers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Medical students, there's a huge drinking culture. But for me, going back to my relationship with alcohol, I grew up not really surrounded by alcohol, see it now and again, go to uni, and then suddenly you're drinking loads and it's part of culture. And that really continues into your 20s, maybe into your 30s. And I think over the last few years, I have, I barely drink anymore.
Yeah.
Right? And what's interesting to me is it's not been a conscious effort for me. So I think our journeys are probably slightly different. So I think the reason I have stopped drinking by and large, I mean, I will have a drink now and again, is because as I've found more meaning and purpose in my life from my job, and listening to the podcast will have heard some of this story before, but since my father died, who I used to care for, I've been on a real journey to discover who I am. And as I've discovered who I am, as I've started to do things in my daily life that really give me meaning and pleasure and purpose, I found that I no longer need to drink anymore, because actually the alcohol was often there to numb.
I think something you've said there is really poignant. I think the greatest discovery you'll ever make is your authentic self.
Yeah.
And I think that's shining through. And I think alcohol masks that. It puts on this a front, whether you're numbing or whether you're trying to be someone that you're not. And when you remove it, you get this chance to be you again. You get this chance to turn up and be social or relax or relieve boredom as you and experience life as you. And if there's things underneath that need to be dealt with, because that's very often the case with people, especially on the extreme end who use alcohol, you get this chance to bring back your vitality, bring back your energy, and also deal with anything that's underlying, but ultimately become you again, your authentic self. That is so powerful. That is the greatest discovery you'll ever make. And I think that leads to more meaning and purpose and vitality in one's life. And I think that's the experience that you've just had, and I've had in many ways.
Yeah. And I guess we've just come at it from different ways, because what's really clear to me is that the work you're doing is so important. And I don't really know or have come across another organization or company or group who's really giving a voice to this, as you call, middle lane drinker.
Yeah.
And I think that's incredibly powerful. But for me, as I was thinking about this, it's really clear this is not actually about alcohol. Alcohol's almost the gateway, isn't it? I mean, that's what it feels to me. It ain't about alcohol.
It's the excuse. Alcohol's the excuse to get in the same room of community of like-minded people that just want to be better. That's it.
Yeah. And for you, by stopping or reducing alcohol, it's led to you getting more meaning and purpose, right? And I guess for me, I have found that by getting more meaning and purpose in my life has by default led to me drinking less alcohol. So it almost works both ways, right?
All of these things, this is what I say. Alcohol is the gateway, or taking a break from alcohol is often the gateway to the good stuff. It's the gateway to more exercise and more movement, better sleep, which leads to this wellness, this happiness, this vitality that leads to meaning and purpose. I see this all the time. This is the reason I'm here. I'm not here because of the stopping alcohol thing. I'm here because of what happened next.
Yeah.
I'm here because of the energy and the vitality and the meaning and the purpose and all these wonderful things that happen after I took a break from alcohol.
Yeah.
That is what inspires me. That's why I'm out on social media live every day, like cheering people on and smiling and going, come on, do this, because I know what's at the other side for them.
You've experienced that. And I think people can very much relate to your story. It's not preaching that you're, whiter than white. And, it's really very much a relatable story that I think many people listening to this podcast right now will be able to relate to on some level. Maybe not brokers, but whether it's family expectation, whether it's friends expectation, whether it's work expectation, it is very hard to resist that. So your research has shown that social pressure is massive.
Absolutely huge. And I, I do a lot of work, again, in corporates with their HR teams, right? And I love the HR teams in corporates. They're doing such great work around wellness, around mental health. And this sort of sums it up. I was with a big corporate recently, and they've got health pods, they've got meditation pods, sleep pods, they've got different laminates for mental health first aiders. They are doing so much wonderful work around mental health in their organization. And then we'll have a conversation. I'll be like, how do you socialize as a group, as a company? Oh, well, every Thursday we have a drinks night. I'm like, oh, and then you can sort of hear the penny dropping. Hold on, is that congruent with mental health? Because you're creating this situation. We know alcohol is disastrous for mental health and it's disastrous for performance. So for a corporate and a company, not only are you doing this thing that's undermining all the hard work that you're doing, you're also affecting the performance of your staff. And to believe that that's not socially pressured is to not understand psychology. As I mentioned about that social pressure, you can imagine a scenario, let's just run through it, that 50% of your staff don't actually want to drink. It's a Thursday night. They don't really want to get on it on a Thursday night. They've got exercise in the morning. They've got a big deadline coming up. They don't particularly want to drink. They arrive at the big free drinks corporate event. The CEO arrives first. He's drinking. What message does that send to the rest of the C-suite? They turn up. 50% of those don't want to drink. They see the CEO drinking. Well, I've got a drink. I want to be part of the tribe. I don't want to be thrown out of the tribe. This is like instinctual, evolutionary, powerful motives going on. Then the senior management turn up. 50% of those don't want to drink, but they see the C-suite drinking. What do they do? Oh, well, I want to be part of the tribe. And it filters all the way down. I mean, I've used an extreme example, but you get my point. So all of a sudden...
Mate, it's not. I don't think it's as extreme.
It's probably more.
I don't think it's as extreme as we might think. I think that is literally what is going down in so many companies and so many friends groups. It is just... it's too much effort to not do it. It's easier. Whenever it's easier to do a certain behavior than not, by and large, people are going to struggle. Yeah. That's unfortunately the reality. And if I also, like you do, a lot of talks in companies about well-being, and to really make those changes, you've got to change the culture within that organization. Yeah. The meditation pod, the nap room, these things are great, right? But it's got to be cultural. If you're going to the napping pod or the meditation pod and that's kind of seen as a bit weird, it's never going to catch on. But if you see the CEO doing it after lunch, going, hey, guys, I'm going to get a quick 20-minute nap so I'm more productive this afternoon. Well, that will feed into the rest of the organization in a massive way rather than simply just having it there.
Oh, exactly. And it's like all that, you've got the ringleader in your friends group. It's the same sort of thing. If they buy into these type of ideas, or they're the first one to say, actually, let's go out and be super social, right? Because I'm all up for people having a laugh and corporates getting together, but just don't make the focal point necessarily all about alcohol. Make it about getting together or being vibrant and communication and just having a laugh, and make alcohol the sideshow. Have it there if people want it, fair enough, but don't make it like the focal point of why you're getting together.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned alcohol and mental health, and I think it's such a good point, because many people actually still believe or think that alcohol can help them with their symptoms. So if you feel a bit anxious, for example, alcohol might take the edge off that. And of course it will, but it's almost just like temporary symptom suppression rather than dealing with the root cause. You mentioned sleep and its impact on your sleep. Again, many people are under the mistaken belief that alcohol is a sleep aid. But as I've said before, as Matthew Walker said before, sedation is not the same as sleep. Alcohol is a sedative, right? The brain waves are not doing the same thing when you have slept post-alcohol than when you've slept without alcohol. Your REM sleep gets tanked when you've been drinking beforehand. And so, yes, you might be in bed with your eyes closed for 7 or 8 hours, potentially, but that doesn't mean you've slept. It doesn't mean your body is restored. And we all know, well, anyone who's drunk before knows the feeling when they have drunk, that it's just a light sleep that often, they wake up multiple times throughout the night, right?
Yeah, exactly. And these are the things that people don't really associate with alcohol. There's an assumption that it helps with sleep. As you said, it doesn't. It's the worst thing you can do. And we know about the detrimental effects of poor sleep in terms of productivity and motivation and mental health. It masks symptoms like anxiety and depression, but it exasperates them the following day. We've all had that anxiety or that cloud that hangs around, as I said, for 1 or 2 days. And I think that's what's going on culturally on a mass scale. Even those people, middle-aged drinkers that are drinking once or twice a week, they don't realize that cloud, that sort of slight underperformance is hanging around for days and days at a time. And when you think about that and you compound it out, you're losing maybe a quarter or half of your life to self-inflicted underperformance. Why would you do that? It just sort of doesn't make any sense when you start to, you zoom out a bit and look back in.
Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying this conversation, there's loads more like it on my channel. Please do press subscribe and hit that bell. Now, back to the conversation. Let's talk a little bit about diversity of foods, and let's talk a little bit about the gut microbiome and why that is so important.
It's so critically important, and it's so interesting. We can see that medical science is being transformed a little bit in like how physics was transformed when they discovered the ultra small particles. This knowledge that these bacteria that have co-evolved with us have such an important role in our health is really giving us some new insights that we can act on to, I think, improve a lot of health outcomes. The bacteria in your gut in particular, very, very simply speaking, they break down the fibrous foods that our human enzymes can't break down. So fiber is found in plant foods, things such as vegetables, fruits, whole grain cereals, legumes, your nuts, your beans and lentils, etc. So all sorts of different types of plant foods have dietary fiber. The gut microbes break that down by a process of fermentation. And in that process of fermentation, they produce many, many, many metabolites. And it's the production of these metabolites that seems to be so important. And we know that they, for example, interact with every cell in the body through these particular receptors. They influence gene activity. I mean, really importantly, most of what we know so far comes from animal studies. So we always have to be a little bit cautious, but there are more and more human studies, and we're doing many studies in our centre that is, looking at this.
That's the Food and Mood Centre.
The Food and Mood Centre, that's
name.
right.
Absolutely love that name. Who came up with that?
Well, it was a joint effort between myself and the comms department at Deakin.
But I think that's progress in itself. And in the 21st century, we actually have an institution called the Food and Mood Centre. I think that's progress.
Well, it's unique in the world in its focus on nutritional psychiatry research. And we've got more than 20 different projects underway at the moment, many more in the planning stages. Trying to get funding for research, of course, is incredibly difficult, but we've had some traction with philanthropic funding, which has been great. But most of the studies that we're doing are looking at this diet, gut microbiome, mental health triangle, because we know that the gut microbiome is so important for our immune system, for our metabolism and body weight, for our brain health, and right across the board. And we know this from a number of different sources of information. And there's a huge amount of research that's being done across the world now in this field, which is wonderful because it means that we're getting advances in our knowledge very quickly. But at this point, what we know is that diet is the most important thing that affects the gut microbiota, and that you can change your gut microbiota and your gut health within a very short space of time, like even within days by changing your diet. And that's such a powerful thing to understand.
So do you have a certain recommendation you make for people in terms of diversity?
Yeah, so what we know so far, and again, we need more studies in humans, but on the basis of some pretty good evidence in humans as well as many, many studies in animals, we know that obviously we need dietary fibre because the bugs can't do what they're supposed to do without the dietary fibre. And, none of us are getting enough dietary fibre, not even close. In Australia, less than 0.5% of children and adolescents get their recommended intake of vegetables and legumes. That's less than 0.5%. So this is not
0.5%.
Yes.
Wow.
This is not just an issue for those of lower education or income. This is something across the board. Less than 5% of adults in Australia. So we're not getting enough dietary fibre, so the bugs can't do what they're supposed to do. But polyphenols seem to be really important. These are the things that are in colourful fruits and vegetables and green tea and dark chocolate and things like that.
And coffee, for there's coffee lovers out there, they contain polyphenols.
Right. Yeah. And really fascinating work, again in animals, but showing that if you put one bunch of rodents on a normal diet, they don't necessarily gain weight. But if you put another group on a high-fat diet, of course, they gain a lot of weight. But if you put a third group on a high-fat diet and then supplement it with polyphenols, they only put on about half as much weight.
Yeah, you mitigate it.
Yeah, so incredibly interesting research. But then your healthy fats, your mono and your polyunsaturated fats, in your quality proteins. But it might also be what you're not eating that's really important in your gut health.
Yeah.
Again, from animal studies, we see that emulsifiers, which are ubiquitous in processed foods, seem to strip the gut lining. We see that artificial sugars seem to have a negative impact on the gut. It's very complex. We're really only just scratching the surface. But I think the key understanding is we already know what sort of diet is consistently linked to longevity. And that's a diet that is high in plant foods and high in a diversity of plant foods, because the more diverse your diet, the more diverse your gut microbiome, and that seems to be a marker of gut health.
It's incredible. The Hadza tribe, this hunter-gatherer tribe in Tanzania, whose lives are relatively untouched by modernity, I read that they're exposed to 2,000 different plant foods in their lifetime. I think they eat about 800 of them. And you compare that to, I think about 60% of the world's food intake comes from 3 plants, which is, it's just remarkable to see.
Yeah.
And I believe that they have between 100 and 150 grams of fiber per day.
Yeah.
Per day.
And we're lucky to get 20 in the West.
We're lucky to get 20.
And then your microbiome, it sort of goes down the toilet, so to speak, because it can't do what it's supposed to do, and then you're losing microbial diversity. And we also see that the large-scale industrial food system and the changes to our global diets, not only is that, of course, driving this massive increase in chronic disease, but also we see a lot of autoimmune conditions and allergic, illnesses. In Australia, where I am in Melbourne, it is the food allergy capital of the world, and it's certainly one of the asthma capitals as well. No one really understands why, but we think it's linked to the early life gut microbiome, because based on what we know so far, the early life gut microbiota plays a really key role in the development of our immune system and also our brain development. Now, we've just finished a really important study in pregnant women at the Royal Children's Hospital looking at whether if you help women to change their diet during pregnancy, does it affect the infant microbiome? Because we need to make sure that the infant microbiome is optimised, we think, to ensure that that child has a strong immune system and optimal brain development.
Yeah, I mean, the implications of this are huge, really, because, we start talking about the SMILES trial. So somebody who has got depression may start to get some benefit from changing their diet. That's incredible in itself. But taking that research on and thinking about what you just said, if early life is so important, and if the diet of a pregnant lady is so important, if we're trying to get to the root of the root of the root of a problem, yes, it's great to be able to treat people who've got a problem, but wouldn't it be great if the research builds up where we know, actually, you know what, when you're pregnant, or maybe when you even pre-conceiving, it's important then to focus on your health and your microbiome health. The implications in terms of the downstream effects could be profound.
That's right. And I talk about that a lot in the book.
You do. It's a really nice bit.
The metabolic state, so whether parents to be are overweight or obese, whether they've got high blood glucose, all of those things seem to be very clearly linked to both cognition and other developmental outcomes in children. We led the first study looking at the potential role of mothers' diets during pregnancy on children's emotional health. There's been many, many more studies since then showing that what mothers eat during pregnancy is linked to their children's emotional health, even when you take into account all sorts of other really important factors. And certainly if you look at the animal studies, you see that if you feed pregnant rats or mice or other non-human primates, those sorts of animals, a junk food, Western type diet during their pregnancy, you see all sorts of impacts on the offspring that are relevant to mental health in humans.
You see it in, we talk about diet. I wrote a chapter on touch when I was writing about stress. And I was looking at this research that shows that pups who lick their offspring a lot when they're young, you modify their response to stress for the rest of their life, because that sort of close contact with your parents at a young age almost in many ways sets your stress responsiveness for the rest of your life. It's really quite incredible. But one thing, Felice, I think you do beautifully well in the book is you write with real compassion. And when you talk about diet for pregnant women, you also talk about, wait a second, let's not feel bad about this. Let's not put blame on people. And I think it's really important when we're talking about what a pregnant mother is eating, because a lot of people will hear that and go, oh no, when I conceived, I was having McDonald's every day, and what impact has that had? And I think there's I'd love to explore what you think about that. It's not about making people feel bad about their choices, is it?
No, that's right. And my jumping off point is always around public health and the fact that we need to make our environment supportive of healthful food choices. So in the West now, even if you go and fill up your car with petrol or anywhere you go, you are bombarded with opportunities and marketing to prompt you to consume these ultra-processed food products. Now, in the US, nearly 60% of energy intake is coming from ultra-processed food products. 60% of children alive today in the US will be obese, not just overweight, obese by the time they're 35, which is their prime child-rearing years. It's not quite as bad in the UK and Australia, but we're certainly getting there. And that's because the food environment supports really poor choices. We have very few limits on marketing. So big food can market, really with impunity. These foods are very, very cheap. They're very easy to produce. They've got a very long shelf life. They're highly palatable. I mean, we are designed to want those sorts of high-fat, high-sugar foods, and they're ubiquitous. They're just everywhere. We can't escape them. So the food environment makes it very difficult to make healthful food choices. And I talk about this a lot in the book, is that it's not about individuals. Yes, we want to empower people to make healthful choices in their life, but it shouldn't be that hard because the environment needs to support those healthful choices.
I think you start off in the book talking about the Victorian times, don't you? And that's a nice example of this.
Well, it was such an interesting...
I never heard of this before.
No, it was a paper that I just came across, and it was written by anthropologists and historians. And they talked about this incredibly brief period in the mid-1800s in Britain when the health of the population was exceptionally good. So if people survived their first 5 years of life, then they had a lifespan that's similar to what we have now, but their rates of degenerative disease were about 10% of what we have now. Now, the reasons for that were very clearly the environment. There were various political imperatives at the time that meant that governments were making sure that the population was getting access to the fresh food that was being grown in farms outside of the cities and brought in on trains. People were growing a lot of food themselves, so that they were having fruit trees or growing vegetables in their backyard. They had chickens. People had a lot of access to seafood. There was a lot of for a whole number of reasons, people had access to lots of fruits and vegetables, nuts. When people did eat meat, they ate all of the meat, all the organs and everything, but they didn't have that much meat. They, of course, had really unprocessed, unmilled bread. And people were doing a lot of physical activity as part of their working life. And at the time, people were exceptionally healthy and very, very strong on average. And then in about 1870, you started to see importation of canned meat, with very high in salt and fat, canned fruit, very high in sugar, condensed milk, white bread and white flour, these sorts of things. And by the end of the century, the army had to lower its average height intake because people were actually stunted in growth. People couldn't eat meat and vegetables and nuts and things like that because their teeth were so bad because of all the sugar they were eating. And it just had such a remarkable impact on the health of the population on average in such a short time span, in one generation. So it just says this is the food environment drives health. Yeah, or otherwise.
It really does. It reminds me of a conversation I had with Dan Buettner on the podcast recently, who studied all the blue zones around the world, these little pockets of populations where they seem to live to a ripe old age in really good health. And what he says is something that's been clear for a long time, which is that people in those areas, they're not trying to be healthy. They're just getting on with their lives. The environment just means that the easy choice, and then the only choice often is the healthy choice. Whereas we're living in an environment now where the easy choice is often the most the most unhelpful choice. And I give you an example. Literally last night, you met my cousin when you came in here today. He's staying with me for a couple of days. And we were driving back from a concert last night, and I was chatting to him about food. And he's in his late 20s, working hard. And It says he commutes. It's about a 10-minute drive from his office back to his apartment. And as he's driving back, if he finishes work at 7:30, he's obviously tired, probably stressed out from the day. And he says on the way home, he passes so many junk food shops. He says one roundabout in particular, there's a strong smell of, I won't say what brand it is, but a very popular fast food chain from around the world. You can actually smell the food as you're driving through it. And it's almost as if he will have to fight temptation every single day. And you ain't going to fight temptation every single day.
No.
You are going to crack at some point.
Absolutely.
And then he also reports to me, this is just, we were chatting about it simply because I said, I told him I'm interviewing you tomorrow. And he was interested. And he said, it's really interesting. Well, I haven't had junk food for a while. I don't really crave it. But once I have it once, I kind of want it again later that week.
Yeah.
Have you studied this at all?
No, but it makes sense because we know that the high fat and high sugar foods interact with the reward systems in the brain, like any of the pleasurable activities, whether smoking, drinking, gambling, drugs, all these sorts of things interact with that reward system in the brain and basically train the brain to perform actions that give that dopamine hit. And food is just another one of those sorts of drivers of the dopaminergic or the reward system in the brain. So having that sort of food everywhere and the smells and the cues to consume it, it's almost impossible to not consume it. So we have to change the environment.
Do you get tempted? You obviously, this is your field. I'm sure you practice what you preach as far as possible. You're human like the rest of us. Do you you're traveling, you've got jet lagged, you're sleep deprived, you're at train stations today, you're at airports. Do you find that when your defenses are down and you're traveling that you get tempted to go down an unhelpful route?
Look, I'm by no means a purist, and I think it's actually really bad for your mental health to be really hung up on the details and being perfect with all your food choices. I go by the 80-20 rule. Yeah. And certainly if 80% of my food choices are good, that's going to put me way above the rest of the population based on what we know about how poorly people are eating. I had popcorn on the way up today because I'm really, really jet lagged, but I also had a big vegetable soup that I got at the station. And, I find that you can make healthy choices nowadays, which is great because even 10 years ago, there were no healthy choices from takeaway. But now you've got Mexican, you've got Japanese, you often can buy really nice soups. You can get kombucha to drink in the takeaway. So things are certainly improving. Basically, my recommendation is just try and avoid the ultra-processed foods and have as much diversity of whole foods as you can. And so what we call a plant-predominant diet. Yeah. I do really worry about the low-carb and the high-fat diets. As I said, we're about to start.
For longevity or because in the short term, people are getting good results on them with things like their blood sugar and certainly weight loss for sure. Yeah. And some are reporting improved cognition in the short term. So is your worry long term, or expand on that?
It's long term. So what we see from all of the evidence is that long term diets that are higher in complex carbohydrates and lower in animal protein and fat are linked to longevity. But in the short term, diets that are lower in carbohydrates and higher in animal protein and fat are linked to leaner body weight and more reproductive success.
I do want to touch on whole grains because whole grains have become quite a controversial area in the diet wars. And I think that's because often what we consider to be whole grains are not whole grains. So I think it's quite clear that there's pretty good research suggesting that real whole grains can have beneficial impacts on your gut microbiome and consequently on your overall health, including your moods. What do you see the problem with whole grains? Is it that interpretation? Is it that the food industry are marketing refined grains as whole grains?
Yes, basically, yes. And I think, people in the US where their food system is just so broken and has been for decades to the point where nobody alive today in the US remembers what normal food looks like. I mean, it really is, it's a rarity. And for them, whole grain might be a brown bread that's still highly refined and full of all sorts of things. But if you look at certainly the epidemiological data, whole grain intake is out of all of the food groups the most strongly associated with improved health outcomes. If you look at the gut and what we know so far, whole grains, and here we're talking about things like oats and barley and freekeh and spelt and buckwheat and brown rice. So things that are true whole grains are just a really valuable source of fibre, for that fermentation process of the gut, but they're also anti-inflammatory.
Yeah.
And they also help with satiety. They help you to feel full. Now, in Korea, they have these multi-stage meals, and you start off with, and you have about 10 dishes or, however many depending on the meal. But you start off with salads and then you move on to seafood and then maybe a little bit of meat. And then right at the end, you'll have a small pot of mixed rice, that wild rice and black rice and that sort of thing, right at the end, just to aid with satiety. And that's probably how we should be eating, with small amounts but lots of diversity of grains. And for me, what I would just say is that people, half of their plate should be vegetables and salads. A quarter should be a form of a whole grain. A quarter should be a form of good quality protein, and then topped off with some healthy oil in the form of olive oil. So it can be really simple like that.
That's really good, simple advice. I mean, one thing I've seen clinically, and you see a lot of these case reports online, but I have seen it people who've read them and have cut out all grains, and they actually do feel better in the short term sometimes. And I often wonder why that is. Is it because then I also look at the data showing that whole grains are really great for longevity and the health of the gut microbiome. And sort of my hypothesis at the moment is that many of us have got disrupted gut microbiomes, because of the way we're living our lives, because of our diets, because of our stress levels, the fact that we're sleep deprived, all these things that influence the gut microbiome. And I think many of the patients who come in to see me who are not feeling well have already got a disrupted gut microbiome. So sometimes when they eliminate certain foods in the short term, actually, because you could eliminate grains and eliminate a lot of the processed stuff as well. And
right.
So you start to feel great. And it doesn't necessarily mean that needs to be the long-term approach. And I think this is a key thing that I'm going to explore more in the future, is the difference between a short-term approach versus what is an optimal long-term approach. And I guess FODMAPs might play part of the, might be part of the story there.
That's right. One of my postdocs is one of the world experts on FODMAP. FODMAPs and low FODMAP diets and the impact on the microbiome. And what we know about FODMAPs is that they are a primary source of fermentation for the gut microbiota. In other words, they're probably the best gut bug food that you can feed it. But as you say, if you've got a gut that is not a healthy gut because of a long-term Western diet and stress and all of those other things, then you're going to have problems digesting those sorts of foods because your gut bugs aren't optimized to actually deal with them. And then a short-term solution is the low FODMAP diet, but it's never intended to be a long-term thing. It should only ever be a short-term, and then people can gradually reintroduce the FODMAP foods, but preferably do it, I would say, with fermented foods and maybe some probiotics. I know that there's a lot of work going into looking at whether supplementing with probiotics and or fermented foods on reintroduction helps the bacteria to adapt so that people can tolerate those foods more. But I do agree that a lot of people in the West, because our diets are so low in fibre and so low in diversity, they react poorly to whole grains, often to legumes and the foods that provide the substrate for the gut bacteria, because their guts are just not able to deal with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back to this whole lack of training in healthcare professionals on nutrition means that a lot of people go to their doctors, they feel very frustrated that they're not being offered decent solutions that make sense to them. So they're reading things online, they're trying them, feeling good in the short term, but then continuing that long term without any support. And
yes.
Again, I'm not criticizing, I totally get it. That's one of the reasons why I like to do these podcasts every week, is to talk to world leading experts like yourself and really just tease out practical experience, research evidence, where we're at, just so people can start thinking. Because I think the more we can empower people, I think the better able they are to make healthy choices. But I also recognize that ultimately it's the food environment that will make the biggest change. You see clients in your clinic all the time. Are there some common themes that you're seeing these days?
Yeah, so I see a lot of people with general anxiety, so worrying about everything, feeling like they can't switch off, feeling like they're on high alert a lot of the time. I see quite a lot of people for social anxiety, so people that really hold themselves back in social situations or avoid social situations completely because they're so afraid of usually what other people think and being judged. I see people with panic attacks. Public speaking is another big one that I see people for. And again, that's just another manifestation of anxiety and fearing judgment, really. And I started to notice when I was researching the book how many other people also felt the same as I did. So thoughts of not being good enough, finding it hard to speak in public, or having social anxiety, not having the confidence to go after things. So that was definitely my story for a long time. And I found that a lot of people experience the same, even though it can often feel as though when we're really struggling with something that we're the only one that feels like that. And then, it's been a big relief for me personally to sort of realise that other people feel the same way. And I found that often, people come up to me and say, it's like you've read my mind, or you've looked inside my brain and written down what was inside my brain. So it's a thing that a lot of people struggle with. I think often we look at people and think that they're really confident and they've got it all figured out, and they were potentially just born confident. That's just the way they are. And we tell ourselves that we are not confident and we're not good enough and we could never do those things. And some examples are people like Adele, who has talked about how she sometimes is sick before she does a performance.
Wow.
And there's an inspirational speaker called Mel Robbins who, during her TED Talk, she was having a panic attack, she said, the whole time, even though she seems really calm and confident when she's actually speaking. And actually what we're seeing often is someone being courageous. Inside they're doubting themselves, they're experiencing fear, they're maybe feeling like an imposter. So we're seeing that their courage, not necessarily their confidence. And I think just knowing that almost gives us a bit of permission to know that we can feel afraid and still do things, and we can still give things a try, even though we don't have, rock solid confidence to begin with.
That really is, I think, in some ways quite inspiring for people and quite reassuring for people. Confidence is a skill that you can learn. And I think that is revolutionary for some people.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's quite empowering to think that, to know that even if you are someone who is shy, 50% of people say that they are shy. So that's a lot of people, struggling with maybe being themselves or holding themselves back. And to know that actually we're not fixed, we are changing all the time. We can do things to help ourselves, even if you are, experiencing anxiety at the moment. You're not going to feel like that forever. No feelings stay the same the whole time. And so there are lots of things that we can do to learn to accept ourselves more, to perhaps go outside of our comfort zones to grow our confidence, because I found that, and this was definitely a pattern for me in the past, I would just avoid anything that I was afraid of, or avoid anything that made me nervous or anxious. I had a lot of social anxiety in the past, and I would just not go to parties. I wouldn't go to a networking event. That was like my worst nightmare, the thought of having to meet strangers or something. And little by little, I started to challenge myself and started to say, right, I'm going to go to this event. I'm going to stay for 5 minutes. I'm going to talk to one person and then I can leave. And in doing that, what happens is I started to retrain my nervous system and teach myself that I could survive those situations. And that's how we grow our confidence. That's one way we can grow our confidence anyway, by slowly challenging ourselves.
So in some ways it's almost like a muscle that you're working out, and you're just progressively lifting a heavier weight maybe as you're going through. And I don't know, is that a reasonable analogy?
Yes, yeah, that's a great way of describing it. Yeah, I think, your nervous system learns that you're not going to die if you go into that situation. Because I think at some level, when we're in fight or flight, it is because we're perceiving, or our nervous system is perceiving, that there's a threat. And so without all that adrenaline is being created. And then when we go to the networking event and we survive, and actually we learn it's not so bad, and your body starts to be retrained in that way.
Why is striving to be perfect so problematic for us?
Well, if we're striving for perfection, we're striving for something that is actually impossible, because perfection is something that is just an opinion, and everyone in the world has a different opinion of what is perfect. If you were trying to create the perfect podcast, everyone in the world has a different idea of that, and you're not going to please everyone. And also what happens when we have that perfectionist mindset is we constantly move the goalposts. So once we've got one job, we're looking at the next one. How can we get the next promotion? Once we've, sold a certain amount of books, we still want to go to the next thing. So we're never satisfied, because we've got that mindset of always pushing, always pressuring, never feeling good enough. It actually comes down to not feeling good enough. And if we don't feel good enough on ourselves, no external thing is going to really satisfy that. And I think it can be very toxic. We often think of perfectionism as being kind of a good thing. And obviously, in some situations, you'd want people to be perfectionists, like your surgeon or something. But in a lot of cases, it's not needed and actually just causes us to worry and stress and actually sometimes not take action because we're worried that we're going to fail.
And we do wait for perfection too much, don't we? And when all we're looking for is progress.
Yeah, so just focus on it being good enough. Be kind to yourself. Know that you're going to fail at times and progress is going to happen. And I think at some point we do just need to try to let go. And actually, often things feel perfect when we accept them. If we can have that attitude of just being more accepting and embracing things as they are, things start to feel as we imagine they would when they're perfect. We get that sense of contentment and that sense of satisfaction. So I think it's about, trying to cultivate some more acceptance.
How can people who are listening to this and who recognise some of the tendencies we're talking about say, I'd love to change that. I would love to be more accepting of myself, but I find it hard. What can they do?
Yeah, so many of us find it really hard to accept compliments or even think about ourselves in a positive way. And I think a really key first step is to start to train yourself to think of yourself in more positive ways. We are often in a pattern of always beating ourselves up, or in terms of negativity bias, which is just the way our brains are wired, we naturally look for the negatives in things or the criticisms because it was a survival mechanism in the past. But we can counteract that by thinking about what were 3 things that you appreciated about yourself today. What did you do well today? What do you like about yourself today? Did you overcome a challenge? Did you help someone? Did you complete a project? And getting into that habit of every day thinking of 3 things that you can appreciate about yourself starts to train your mind to look for more things to appreciate about yourself. And you eventually start to think of yourself in a more positive way. And this can grow your self-esteem, your confidence. You can be kinder to yourself as a result.
Would you recommend people just do this in their head or actually start writing this down?
I think there is something about writing it down that seems more solid and it seems more concrete. So writing it down if you can, but even if sometimes I do this in bed. I get into bed at night and I just think about the day and I was like, what were 3 things that I appreciate about myself today? Just doing it in that moment before going to sleep.
Yeah, it's an act of self-love, isn't it? It's again, even if you've had the crappiest day and everything went wrong or you perceive everything to have gone wrong and be stressed and you're running late, there probably are 2 or 3 things that you're quite proud of about how you handled yourself or what you did, and it is. What strikes me is that these are quite simple things that people can do. They're not that tricky, right? Chloe, you shared a really nice story in the book where you, I don't know if it's when you were starting off as a therapist or not, but you wanted to do some group sessions. And I wonder if you could just tell that story, because I think it's quite inspiring for people, and just A, what happened, but B, how you processed it and what you learnt from that experience.
Yeah, definitely. So when I'd first started as a therapist, I decided to do my first event and I was really excited about it and very, very nervous. And I'd prepared a lot for it. I'd learned the script off by heart. I'd put up posters in local cafes and contacted clients and put quite a lot of effort into trying to organise it. And when I did the event, I got a grand total of 1 person turning up and I was completely devastated. I spent the kind of the next hour after the workshop really beating myself up, thinking I'm a terrible therapist. This is a sign that I should just quit and never try to do an event again, and catastrophizing and thinking that this meant all these things about me, that I was, not good at what I was doing. And after kind of a certain period of beating myself up, I had a bit of a word with myself and I decided to do some writing about what I was thinking. And I wrote down some of those thoughts that I was having and started to realize how ridiculous they sounded written down. And I started to ask myself, right, what can I learn from this experience? What can I do differently next time that will help it to, be more successful in terms of people turning up. It's such a common thing how we quote unquote fail at something, and we make it mean a load of things about us, that we're not good enough. And quite often we give up if we beat ourselves up about something. And if we can be kind to ourselves, and if we can think about, what am I learning from this situation? How can I use this as information to help me to get better next time? Then we're much more able to try again and to use that as a valuable learning experience.
I think you used journaling, didn't you, as part of your way of processing this?
Yes. So just getting pen and paper, writing down what was on my mind, a stream of consciousness. And, once we got it written down, we see it in a different perspective, I think. There's some of the things that we think and some of the things that we tell ourselves. And we can start to, hopefully take it a bit less seriously, or start to change that into something a bit more positive when it's written down.
I've mentioned journaling quite a bit on this podcast. And one of my mates actually phoned me up last week and he said, "Hey, mate, you talk about journaling a lot. What is journaling? What are you actually doing when you journal? Are you thinking about it? Are you just writing anything that comes down into your head?" So, as a therapist, if someone comes into you and you recommend journaling, how do you break it down for them in terms of what they should be doing?
Yeah, so I often recommend that my clients get a notepad, and it could be at any time of day that works for them. Often people do it in the morning because it's a nice way to start your day. Some people do it last thing at night to help them to unwind before bed. But you just write a stream of consciousness. So whatever you're worried about, whatever's on your mind, whatever you've got on that day. And what happens is it helps us to put our feelings into words. And there's something very powerful about doing that, because when we're able to kind of label our emotions and, really kind of narrativize the thoughts and feelings, we start to feel more in control of them. We start to process them more easily. And it's not just a jumble in our heads anymore and all these anxious kind of thoughts and worries. It's out and it's down on paper, and we can start to process it. So just writing a stream of consciousness, I think, is a great step.
Yeah, I think it's a great tip, and I think it is deceptively powerful. Journaling really does move the needle, I think, in the way you feel about yourself, the way you feel about people around you, your life. I'm a huge fan of journaling. I think people should definitely give this a go. If that conversation resonated with you, here is another incredibly powerful one that I really think you're going to enjoy. Give it a click and let me know what you think.
In the short term, it can lead to allergy and autoimmunity, but long term, it looks as if it increases the risk of a whole diverse range of very serious chronic diseases.